May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our rock and our salvation. This passage from Matthew about loving God and our neighbor is so familiar that hearing it sometimes is like hearing the ABCs playing in the background. We've heard it all before. We know how it goes. We find it useful on occasion, especially if we're scrolling through computer files. We know we'll hear it again, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We don't really think about it every day. Love God, love your neighbor. Why bother? We've learned it already. Maybe alongside the 23rd Psalm, the Lord's Prayer, or perhaps a few keywords or hacks, or even the response, the Lord be with you, and also with you. But what might happen if we slowed down and really listened to it instead of gaining speed along the way? Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." What if instead of reminding ourselves that it sounds kind of like the ABCs running through a background, what if we chose to meditate on this passage each morning, every day, for the next month? How might it influence our responses to the people nearest us and those apart from us? What if we approached it differently instead of as something we already know? What if we recognized it what it truly is? Mission impossible. Good morning, dearly beloved community of St. James. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, involves the recovery of love as the primary identifier of who we are as a community and as individuals. We are to take 3 companions with us on our journey. It will be hard. It will involve personal sacrifice. We will be misunderstood. Our motives will be questioned, our minds transformed, and all that we are, our heart, passions, soul, desires, our brilliant minds and reasonings will be oriented toward loving God and every one of our neighbors fully, especially those we find most difficult. In the movie series, the next line goes, "You have 48 hours to make your decision. If any member is caught or killed, we will disavow all knowledge of you. And this message will self-destruct in 5 seconds." While loving God and loving each other isn't a movie, it's real life. Everywhere we turn, people are afraid, defensive. Some are heavily arming themselves. Others protest in the street around the world for justice that is absent or too little and too late. Many don't feel heard, and still others feel they have heard enough. And sometimes I am in more of those categories than I care to admit. Perhaps you are too. But then this passage takes an interesting turn, for it continues with Jesus asking them what they thought of the Messiah. And this question is an important one if we are going to consider accepting the near impossible task of fully loving God and fully loving each other. What we believe matters, and what we believe about Jesus matters greatly. If we believe that Jesus is simply Sunday's major player, then his life, death, and resurrection may be reduced to data points. But if we believe that Jesus is the Messiah, Emmanuel, the living God in human form who loves us and all of creation giving up everything for us to be with us, then the command to love God and our neighbor takes on much greater significance. This passage is not simply the skillful dialogue of a wise rabbi, circumventing moments of potential entrapment. So this passage is simply not the skillful dialogue of a wise rabbi, circumventing moments of potential entrapment by his enemies. The command to love God and others is not just empty talk, but it came from one who walked a costly way of life that included walking on stormy seas, being hungry in the desert, standing up for those not valued by society, embracing children, welcoming foreigners, enduring public humiliation, suffering injustice, and staggering along the path to Calvary, helped along by an African man from Cyrene named Simon. The mission, should we choose to accept it, allows us to be a part of God's plan for the world, a world where love is our deepest passion, our greatest motivator. Through moments of breaking bread together, praying together, encouraging each other, and forgiving each other. Moments of standing up for what is holy, true, and loving in wonderful and difficult situations. A while back, perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, people placed safety pins on their lapels, signaling that if you were in trouble due to prejudice, we would help you. I thought of my Muslim and Sikh neighbors, strangers I would stand beside. So I placed a large safety pin on my lapel. At the 9 o'clock service, I said that a dear friend noticed the safety pin. But in point of fact, that dear friend was my daughter. And she says, "Mom, I know your story. People should be wearing the safety pin for you so that you know there are people who will help you." A daughter much too wise, who knew the world more than I wanted her to know it. And for me, a light bulb went off. As much as we want to help, sometimes we are all still at risk. But this mission is much too important to lay it aside. We must love God with all that we are. We must love our neighbor as ourselves. Sometimes a sermon is hard to preach. Sometimes it's even harder. But the only way forward, whatever you did catch or miss, is loving God with all that we are and loving our neighbor as we would love ourselves. Our mission, if we choose to accept it, is to love God with all that we are, all that we have, all that will be ever become, and to ensure by acts of love coming from the depths of love that God has given us, the limitless love of God, that every one of our neighbors is well loved also. Unlike the fictional Mission Impossible, I have bad news. The command to love will not self-destruct in 5 seconds. It's been a part of our faith for thousands of years, reaching back to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. But I also have some very good news, and it is that God will never disavow God's knowledge of us. The mission to love that at times seems impossible, let us choose to accept it wholeheartedly, for we don't do it alone. We do it in community with all the saints that have gone before us, that are yet to come, with those present with us, and most importantly, with God's help.